We begin this morning with the severe winter weather that continues to hammer California residents. Officials say neighborhoods in the mountains east of Los Angeles could be snowed in for another week after this weekend's storm.
Now, as you can see, some people were forced to take drastic measures, writing a message in the snow that read, "Help us." The National Guard has already sent crews to 13 different counties in California, but many are struggling to get aid because of the icy roads. And in the Sierra Nevada mountains, a record amount of snowfall has been recorded. Major roads leading in and out of Lake Tahoe have been shut down because of the winter storm. Several counties are still under a winter advisory this morning as the storm begins moving east.
So what's next for the severe weather out west? Let's get a check at your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us with the latest. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning to you both. And unfortunately, we're going to see more of the same. We're going to be adding feet of snow to the Sierra Nevada mountains, Northern California as well. That is today, the next day. And then by midweek, we're looking at another powerful storm moving onshore. This is going to bring the temperatures up. We're going to see rain. So we're adding rain on top of melting snow. That's going to be a problem as we head throughout the middle of the week. But for today, we're looking at 14 million people impacted by winter alert. That includes the West. It also includes the Intermountain West, into the Northern Plains, portions of the Upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, into parts of the Northeast as well. We'll talk about that. So lots going on today. Unsettled weather throughout the northern part of the nation. This is what it looks like on radar. You can see the blue, also the white. Where you see the white, that's the heavier snow falling. So we're looking at heavy snow falling in portions of the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, seeing some rain as well. And then in between, we're going to see some mixed precipitation, some freezing rain, some sleet. This is going to move into the mid-Atlantic as we head towards tonight into tomorrow. So even New York City, you could see a dusting of snow overnight into tomorrow. So an active start to the week. This is what it looks like in terms of the setup. We have snow continuing across the west and the northern plains, a quick burst of rain and snow tonight into Tuesday in the mid-Atlantic. We're looking at that snow falling in portions of the Great Lakes as well. And then as we go throughout tomorrow, we're going to see a stationary front parking itself over the southern plains. This is going to bring some problems in terms of showers and thunderstorms, some really heavy rain, the potential for flash flooding. That's Tuesday into Wednesday. So we have some warm weather, we have some cold weather. We certainly have winter still in place in parts of the country, and then record-breaking temperatures in parts of the South. By Wednesday, looking at heavy rain lingering over Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. This is where we're particularly concerned for some flash flooding. We're going to see 2 to 4 inches of rain falling in portions, even greater amounts where we're seeing some training storms. In terms of the rainfall, where you see those brighter colors, the pinks, the purples, that's where we're expecting the highest amounts of rain. So again, the Sierra Nevada mountains, Northern California, portions of the Dakotas too. You're expecting a lot of snow there, upwards of 8 inches, a little bit more in banding of snow. And then the Northeast, we'll end it here. We're looking at some snow falling also in the Great Lakes. Could see quite a bit of snow in portions of northern and central Pennsylvania, also western New York. Back to you guys.
All right, busy Monday morning. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Now to Ohio, where another Norfolk Southern train carrying chemicals has derailed. On Saturday, 28 cars jumped the tracks near Springfield, and that is about 200 miles away from the site of another major crash that happened just last month. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch has more.
Another Norfolk Southern derailment, again in Ohio. The harrowing moment captured on camera. This driver backing away from a railroad crossing Saturday as several train cars came off the tracks in Springfield. Norfolk Southern says that train was carrying hazardous materials, liquid propane and ethanol. The company says those cars did not derail.
No release of any chemical or any hazardous material to the soil, to the air, to the water.
Officials reporting no injuries and no public health threat, but they asked less than a dozen residents within 1,000 feet of the site to shelter in place for roughly 9 hours overnight. Some who live miles away largely unfazed.
I assumed that, if it was anything important, I'd probably get wah, wah on my phone.
So you weren't too worried because you weren't getting any kind of alert?
Yeah, exactly.
Authorities also say they were not aware this train had hazardous material on board before the derailment.
We were not notified, which is not uncommon.
This Dayton area incident comes about a month after Norfolk Southern's toxic derailment, roughly 220 miles away in East Palestine, Ohio. State officials say they were not aware of that train's hazardous cargo either before its derailment.
What do you say to people who say you shouldn't be operating right now?
I would say that, first of all, safety is our #1 priority.
The railroad says the train had 212 cars and 2 crew members, with 4 of the 28 cars that derailed having previously carried either diesel exhaust fluid or an additive commonly used in wastewater treatment.
It's honestly weird that this is actually happening everywhere.
This is Norfolk Southern's fourth derailment in Ohio in less than 5 months. One of the state senators, Sherrod Brown, calling this unacceptable, again making a push for legislative safety reform, which has bipartisan support. Back to you.
Jesse, thanks so much. And in health news, a surge in severe cases of the stomach bug is causing adults and children alike to flock to emergency rooms across the country.
CDC data shows that the average rate of positive norovirus tests hit 17% by the end of last week. That's the highest it's been over the past year.
And this comes as concerns are rising about what the CDC is calling a new drug-resistant bacteria that they say could be a serious public health threat.
Joining us now is NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. Dr. Azar, thanks for joining us this morning. So what is behind this recent spike in norovirus cases? Why does it appear to keep spreading?
Right. Good morning, guys. Well, you know, if you look at the graph, we can show our viewers that around the same time last year, we were at about a 16% positivity rate. And we tend to see a lull in the summer months. And we definitely see an uptick between November and April. Like respiratory viruses, these kinds of, GI bugs, the stomach flu, tends to spread more frequently and more easily in the winter months because people are indoors and they're sharing spaces. Norovirus is a really, really stealthy bug. It can survive on surfaces for hours, even a couple of days, and it is incredibly contagious. It does, as the name implies, it causes a stomach flu. So we're talking about nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, achiness. You get sick really quickly. You tend to improve within a couple of days. Sometimes symptoms can linger for a little bit longer, but boy, once it hits you, you're out. You're down for the count.
And as if one bad strain is not enough, Dr. Azar, let's talk about Shigella, because that's a different drug-resistant strain of bacteria that they say also causes stomach bug symptoms. So what can you tell us about it? And also, how does one distinguish between Shigella and norovirus?
And norovirus. Well, so first of all, the biggest distinction between the two is that norovirus is in fact a virus. Shigella is a bacteria. That's important because the treatment for norovirus is supportive. There are no antibiotics. We don't treat viruses with antibiotics. Shigella is a bacteria that is common and causes bacterial illness, typically in young kids and in people who are otherwise healthy, not immunocompromised. It's also typically a self-limited disease. We tend to not give antibiotics. But as in many cases of infectious diseases, there are some populations that are more susceptible to more severe disease, including HIV-positive folks, people who are immunocompromised. And we have seen a rise in cases in men who have sex with men. And so in those populations, we get a little bit more nervous. And the reason, of course, that the CDC is sounding an alarm is that we've seen a rise of what they are referring to as drug-resistant Shigella, meaning that it's resistant to the most common types of bacteria. And that, again, is because of overuse and misuse of antibiotics. That's when we start to get, more concerned more globally and what this kind of means epidemiologically.
So, Dr. Azar, what are the things we can do to try and prevent getting norovirus?
So for both of these, because they are transmitted with what we call the fecal-oral route, that is, you're going to introduce the bacteria or the virus to yourself inadvertently. The number one thing to do is wash your hands really, really well. Whenever you come in or out of a space before eating, washing your food, your fresh vegetables and fruits really, really well, sanitizing countertops. That is what you need to do. If you have a family member, especially with norovirus, who's sick, they should really isolate. I know we don't like to use that term. It gives us little PTSD from COVID-19, but kind of keep them separate away from family members, wear gloves, and sanitize the area that they are. But hand washing, guys, is the way to go. Norovirus isn't really killed that well with hand sanitizer. If it's all you've got, you can use it, but it's really about hand hygiene here.
All right, some good advice. Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you so much.
And overnight in Georgia, at least 35 people were detained just outside Atlanta after protest over a controversial police training center. The Atlanta Police Department released this video of the chaotic scene. Police say protesters threw firecrackers and Molotov cocktails and set fire to construction equipment. The confrontation is bringing new attention to protests against the proposed public safety training center, which some locals have nicknamed Cop City. There have already been several demonstrations against the site, and some opponents say the facility is a move to, quote, militarize law enforcement, and the location would also be a threat to the environment.
Over the weekend, disgraced attorney Alex Murdaugh started a new chapter behind bars after he was sentenced to life in prison for murdering his wife and son.
Murdaugh's latest mugshot seen here shows him with a newly shaved head, and he's being held at the Kirkland Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. And that's where he'll stay for at least a month as he undergoes medical testing before he's transferred to a maximum security prison. Murdaugh's lawyers say they plan to file an appeal within the next 10 days, and he still faces dozens of other charges. So let's talk about this with NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos on set here with us. So, Danny, I feel like we were talking about this all week for good reason.
Seems familiar, doesn't it?
Seems kind of familiar.
For 6 weeks, yeah.
So, obviously, we're expecting an appeal from Murdaugh's team. What would that look like in this murder trial?
You have to appeal. In almost every major felony, you're going to see an automatic appeal, certainly in a murder case. Two major points you'll see on appeal. Number one, the introduction of the financial crimes evidence as motive for killing his wife and son. Strange, because practically speaking, the introduction of this evidence by the state actually helped the defense. It got everybody talking about, I can't believe someone would kill their wife and son to get sympathy or avoid financial crimes. But yet, it is still, even though that may be what almost got him acquitted, we'll never know, although the jury, from what we understand, it wasn't almost at all, it wasn't a close call. Still, they will appeal based on the admission of that evidence. The second point will be the prosecution's reference to Murdaugh not coming forward and volunteering certain information, which might be in violation of his Fifth Amendment privilege to remain silent. But I'm not so sure that'll be a winner because the Fifth Amendment protects your right to remain silent. Murdaugh intermittently remained silent, talked to police, then he even took the stand.
Right.
So the appellate court might decide that, look, you can't have it both ways. If you decided to talk on some things, you didn't talk on others, you essentially gave up your right to remain silent.
So murder clearly sort of the main event here, but we have to keep in mind Murdaugh faces nearly 100 other charges, including those alleged financial crimes. Trial set for a later date. What should we know about those charges?
Well, to some degree, Murdaugh has admitted to some of them vaguely, but has admitted to them when he took the stand in his own defense. Those investigations and prosecutions will continue even though he is in prison and even though he's serving 2 consecutive life sentences, because those crimes have separate victims, and those victims do have a right to vindication, to maybe not restitution, but at least to see that justice is done.
So, Danny, could any of Murdaugh's testimony from the murder trial apply to these other trials that we'll likely see with him?
Prosecutors will cut that testimony and paste it right into this new prosecution. Not only is the transcript admissible, an admission is always admissible, whether you give it under oath or tell a friend. Those were admissions, and under the rules of evidence, you can take those and introduce those into this case. The prosecutors in the financial crimes cases breathed a sigh of relief when Murdaugh took the stand and essentially admitted to much of what they're going to prosecute him for.
Well, won't look good for him. Danny Savalos, you'll keep us posted on it. Thank you so much.
President Biden was in Selma, Alabama yesterday to mark the 58th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. That's the moment when state troopers brutally attacked peaceful protesters marching against discrimination. The incident led to the passage of the historic 1965 Voting Rights Act. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now with more on this. So, Monica, voting reform very much front and center yesterday. What was the president's message on this, and why was this event just so important for him?
Hi there, Joe. That's right. President Biden did make a renewed call for voting rights legislation and reform, something he's really been pushing along with his administration since he was elected into office, and something that he said, unfortunately, has not yet been able to be accomplished and wasn't able to get done when Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. So now prospects become even more complicated in a Republican-controlled House. But the president nonetheless spoke to the importance of this moment. You see him there walking across the infamous Edmund Pettus Bridge, where, of course, in the 1960s, when those peaceful marchers were trying to cross it, they were beaten, they were tear gassed, And the president talked about, again, this moment in history and why he feels the urgency to act is higher now than ever. Take a listen.
This fundamental right remains under assault. The conservative Supreme Court has gutted the Voting Rights Act over the years. Since the 2020 election, a wave of states and dozens of anti-voting laws fueled by the big lie and the election deniers now elected to office.
And now this isn't the first time that the president has been to Selma or given a similar speech. The last time he was there was during the 2020 campaign when he was still candidate Biden. And that is where he pledged to really act on voting rights. So that is why you see this call come to the front again, as of course, we're expecting President Biden to likely launch a re-election bid in the coming weeks.
You know, the president making clear he's struggling to get this legislation through. Where do things stand with this push for voting legislation?
Yeah, and it's really on a very long list of agenda items that the White House would like to try to act on. And the president tried to put that into context, talking about places where he feels he's been able to deliver for Black Americans, specifically when it comes to economic justice or when it comes to some executive orders on police reform, though, again, the president said he would like to see more done there in Congress. But the reality check is that it is unlikely that something like the John Lewis Voting Act, which the president pushed for, of course, referencing the late congressman who was a part of Bloody Sunday 58 years ago. It's unlikely right now that that will get passed again because of the GOP-led House. But the president said he'll continue to push for it nonetheless. And again, this speech did have a little bit of the flavor of a pre-campaign launch, going through a lot of what the president says are his accomplishments so far, while citing a lot of the work he said is left to do.
Pre-campaign things, Monica, we saw some veiled criticism from the president. It was directed at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who also has not said yet that he's running in 2024, but recently blocked an advanced placement course on African-American studies. So what did the president have to say about that?
That's right. And you can really read between the lines here, because even though the president did not call out the Florida governor by name, he did talk about that in this sort of veiled reference, as you mentioned. And this is something the president has talked about before, specifically in February during Black History Month. It's something Vice President Harris has actually also spoken out on, really making clear that in their view, history is not something they say that should ever be censored or processed. It should be taught as it happened. And Selma is at the center and an example of that. Here's a little bit of that part.
We can't just choose to learn what we want to know and not what we should know. We should learn everything, the good, the bad, the truth of who we are as a nation. And everyone should know the truth of Selma.
And this is something, again, where President Biden likely won't go on the offensive, because he feels, and the White House feels, he doesn't need to go further by specifically calling out that Florida amendment and resolution that you talked about, Joe. But we can expect the president and the vice president to continue to call out the importance, they say, of these historical moments. Certainly this seminal moment in Selma, when you talk about the civil rights movement and the landmark Voting Rights Act that was passed back in 1955. Joe.
All right. Monica Alba covering the White House for us. Monica, thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.